Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start promptly in 2 minutes, and bear with us as we have more folks logging in. So just 2 minutes, we'll start promptly. For those of you who are just joining, we're going to start our webinar promptly at 12:45. So unofficial welcome. Bear with us for another minute and a half and we'll get going. If you've just joined us, it's appropriate to put yourself on mute. And then once we get into the webinar, you'll be able to have a voice. Okay, everybody, official good afternoon. Welcome to our Drive-By MBA webinar. Today's topic is how to guide your employees to be focused and productive. Wow, that seems like a big universe of a topic, yet we'll be able to drill down with the best practice and some tips to support that best practice. So let's go ahead and get started. And we will do so with a refresh on how this works. And here is our quick set of bullet points. I am Cassie Hogue. I'm a MAP Senior Consultant. I'll be your facilitator during the Drive-By MBA webinar, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michael Pizzell, who is an executive consultant at MAP and on our board of directors. And Michael will help with our Q&A portion of the webinar. We'll do 15 minutes of content and then 15 minutes of Q&A for those of you who have the time to stay with us. So you'll get that content fast and furiously, and then we'll move on to our Q&A. And that's when it will be appropriate for you to come off of mute should you wish to ask a question in real time. On that note, let's look at our our key points on technology. And that has to do with, first of all, keeping yourself on mute unless you're speaking. Background noise can disturb the experience for everybody. So just remember to do that. Also, if you have a question at any point during the content delivery, then go ahead and hit that chat button and click on that and ask your question. Because as soon as we go to Q&A, I'll go to that chat box first, and I will answer those questions first in the order that they're posed. So do use your chat to pose any questions. And other than that, if you've been here before, if you've been to one of our webinars before, you know that we're going to have a poll. And today it's 4 questions that I'll be posing. So be ready to consider each of the questions and quickly submit your answer. And then we'll go to the topic itself, the what and the why. This will be your chance to understand the best practice that I have called from research and from think tanks around the country. So somebody needs to go on mute. I'm going to put you all on mute. Okay. There we go. We had an echo there, so I had to put everybody on mute. I will unmute you all when we get to Q&A. Okay. So the format is you'll have one key takeaway and 3 tips to support that key takeaway. So get ready. It would be appropriate to take notes, although you'll all get a copy of the presentation that informs our discussion, and then right into our questions. So let's go to our poll. And as I previewed, we'll have 4 questions, and we're going to pose them in the form of ratings. So I want you to rate your employees or your team on the following 4 dimensions. So here they are. The first question is going to be about the way they were before the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, were they focused? How focused were they? It's going to be a rating. You're going to select one answer out of 5. And then you're going to rate them about how well focused they are now. Has there been a difference? Are they less focused? Are they more focused? Are they about the same? And then on the other side of the screen, we're going to ask the same 2 questions about productivity. How would you rate their level of productivity before the pandemic? How do you rate it now? And be assured that your answers to the poll are all anonymous. So be forthcoming. Let me go ahead and launch the poll so you can go ahead and register your answers. And we'll do one question at a time. So here's your first question. Before the pandemic, before we got the stay-at-home order, how would you have rated your employees' ability to consistently focus on what's most important, their focus? So go ahead and submit your answers. And you'll progress through all 4 questions. So you rate how their ability to focus, how good they were at focusing before the pandemic, after the pandemic, and then you're going to rate their productivity before the pandemic and after the pandemic now. So I see a number of you already through. That's terrific. So go ahead and get your answers in. I'll keep it open until we have most everybody weighed in here. Making good progress. So it looks like we got about half of you already complete with the poll. Getting some interesting trends popping up here. Okay, we've got 2/3 of you weighed in. Ah, now we just popped up to 80%, so a couple more. All right, I'll go ahead and close the poll in 15 seconds. So if you have yet to submit your votes, please go ahead and do it now. Okay, 5 seconds until I close the poll. All right, let's see what we've got. Okay, so if you're looking at your screen, you'll be able to see our polling results. This is interesting. Before the pandemic, the way you rated your employees' ability to consistently focus was in just 2 buckets. The majority of you said that they were pretty good at it. And the rest of you said they were generally doing okay with this. All right, they were pretty well focused. Now let's look at how you rate them at this moment. And what we've got here is, well, they're generally focused. So that's now the majority. Some of you say they still are pretty good at it. One of you said they're laser focused in spite of the distractions, and I'll bet you're very proud of them for that. That's terrific. Yet we've got 3 of you now here. Sometimes they're focused, mostly they're not. And as you recall with question number 1, We were without anybody there. Interesting. That's about what we would have expected. Let's look at question number 3. This is about productivity. So before the pandemic, again, we've got favorable responses. They were generally productive, as you would expect. Slightly more of you said they were mostly meeting those productivity expectations, so they were doing well. And 2 of you said they were really great at producing probably above and beyond what you expected. So that's great. Now let's look today. We do have 2 of you who then went here. They're lagging behind where they should be. Same majority saying they're reasonably where they need to be. And then 8 of you said they've been very productive, which again is more than what we had in the prior question. That happens to be a phenomenon that's industry agnostic and worldwide. And that is, although it's been very difficult for everyone, this managing through this pandemic and the safety protocols and all the other changes, the new normal, et cetera, it's been difficult. Productivity worldwide has gone up. It's an interesting phenomenon, and you're reflecting that here. And this is very encouraging that 42% of you have them saying that they've been very productive. Yet we're without the, they're doing awesome. That's understandable. Okay, so let's move on. And we'll go to our big takeaway. And this is the result of what researchers are saying and what we have learned from the think tanks that are studying this matter of focus on productivity. And here's what they say, that we ought to do this. We ought to go ahead and develop a set of operating principles. And they should be along the lines of lean manufacturing or lean production. If you're unfamiliar with lean, it's okay. I'll help you understand what operating principles are. And then once we develop them, we need to consistently use them, to refer to them, to tie them in, to bring them up, talk about them, meetings, messaging. And if we do that, our people will be more focused and more productive. Okay, interesting. Operating principles. So behind a good what, there needs to be a good why, and we have our whys. Before we move on to that, though, I want to get a little bit more specific on our operating principles. And here's the definition. They're the absolutes, meaning they're what your company does no matter what, relative to conducting its business. No matter what, you're going to do these things. They're just the absolutes of what you do to conduct your business. And they usually, in your world, have to do with topics like this that I'm circling. By the way, most companies usually have 5 or 6 of them, maybe 4, maybe 7. Yet that's what they are. So I apologize for almost skipping over that. Here's the why, though. Here's the why behind the what. And it really has to do with the fact, the proven fact, that if you refer to operating principles, you get better direction. You give better direction to your employees. You are able to focus them better. They provide a framework for messaging. They help you link your decisions together and communicate your decisions more effectively. And they help people relate to their work. And when people relate to the purpose behind their work, then they're more productive. So that's why. So that's all very compelling. And let's look now then at our 3 tips. Okay, so there's this broad concept of operating in principles. Well, tip number 1 is, if you're without operating principles, you ought to develop them. Those of you who perhaps have used lean manufacturing, you might already have them. If you do have them, you ought to revisit them. Look at them and make sure they fit the current circumstances. You may need to refine them. And here are bullet points under the tip. Certainly make sure they reflect reality rather than what you aspire to be. Remember, they're the absolutes. No matter what, this is how you're going to conduct business. Rather than being something you want to be, they need to be something that you are. Here's the good news. They should be short and sweet, 1 or 2 sentences each. Okay, it's unnecessary to spend days or weeks on this. If you do need to develop them, you need to get people involved in order to do that. Everybody who will be touched by them needs to be involved in some way. Okay. They also need to line up with your mission, vision, and values. We talked about that last week. And they need to be relatable, understandable, and relatable by everybody who is expected to live them. Okay, that goes without saying. It's probably helpful to look at an example if you do need to develop operating principles. And I brought this one up, and you'll probably be able to relate to this. To have a clean and organized work areas. And we want to have those because they enable safe operations, and we're going to be so relentless about this that our work sites will be customer visit ready any day, any time. That's an example, short and sweet, right? Short and sweet. Okay, let's look at our tip number 2. And it has to do with visibility. People need to see these, just like they need to see your mission, vision, and values. They need to be posted, and they need to be invoked frequently. So if you decide to adopt operating principles or dust them off, you need to have a graphical rendering that you can put up somewhere, put it on posters, display it at work sites or elsewhere, put it on coffee mugs, do something with it so that it's visible, literally visible. Now this one is really important. Discuss as a first agenda meeting whenever you have an all hands meeting. Just bring it up. Here are operating principles. And then let the rest of the agenda flow out of your operating principles. Talk about them a lot and use them to focus employees on what's most important. That's what our webinar is about, is focus and productivity. Okay, let's go to our 3rd tip. These operating principles, they ought to underpin your decisions, just like your values do. These are about how you conduct business. Your values are about how you behave toward one another and toward your customers and your other stakeholders. So here's the background behind the tip. Whenever there's a difference of opinion, use the operating principles to finalize, to cast a vote. Do use them as the why whenever you ask your team to do something different or new. Do know that they work. Have confidence in them. They keep people grounded. And when people are grounded, they're more focused and they're more productive. If you've had decisions that met resistance, then bring up your operating principles and see how they stack up. And then, of course, they can help inspire new ideas, new suggestions, new actions. Okay, let's summarize. Operating principles, that's the key takeaway. You ought to have them. You ought to use them a lot. If you already have them, refine them. Make sure people can see them and use them, particularly when you're making decisions. Okay, we do have several questions in chat. It's time for Q&A. For those of you who were content only, goodbye. I hope you'll join us for our next webinar. Yet please do stay on for the Q&A. We'll learn more. So let me go to the chat and see what we got going on. Okay, this one had to do with the poll, so that's taken care of. All right, we have another question here, and it's a good one, and I get asked it a lot. It's, how do we know what our people should be focused on? How do we know what our people should be focused on? And the answer to that is whatever ties to your overarching goals for your company or your team for this year. or for the next 6 months or the next 12 months. Whatever ties to those goals, that's what you should focus your people on. Whatever actions, whatever initiatives, whatever projects line up to achievement of those goals, that's what should be focused on. If you're still struggling with what to focus on, it's probably helpful to draw a matrix where you have on one axis, you have the importance of the project or the initiative, and on the other axis, you have the urgency. So urgency of it and importance of it. And anything that plots in the top right corner of that matrix, that's what you ought to have people focus on. Sometimes that's very helpful. Okay, so I just exhausted the questions in chat. So we'll open it up. I'll make sure you're all unmuted. I welcome any question. First come, first serve. First come, first serve. Okay, here's another question in chat. Let me go back up. Sorry, folks. Here's another question in chat, and it's a request. And it's, can you please provide more examples of operating principles? Okay. So what I will do when I provide the PowerPoint presentation that underpinned our content, I'll also provide a number of examples of operating principles. So I'll help you out with that right now. Okay. So thank you for that question. I'll give them to you. And on that note, you'll also, in addition to the presentation, you'll receive a tip sheet, a one-page tip sheet that has the content on it, meaning the big idea, the key takeaway of use operating principles to get your people focused and productive, as well as the 3 tips and the bullet points under the tips. So you'll have that as well. I will include more examples, and I'll put it on the page where you see the one example of the presentation. So what else, everybody? So I'm going to go again to my colleague, Michael Pizzell, because he's lived this whole ecosystem of focus and productivity for several decades. What's the typical question that you get, Michael, relative to focus and productivity? You're on mute, Michael, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Yeah, one of the principles that I had in the past when I had a lot of people that drove vehicles and did installations and maintenance was do it right the first time. And so we would you've mentioned the consistency in reinforcing the principles. And I recall basically every time we had a meeting, that was really the first principle. Going back to have to finish a piece of business or work was costly. And so it not only affected individual productivity, but it also had a cost effect as well. And so that was a guiding principle that we had, was do it right the first time. And I think that's probably the thing that comes to mind, Cassie, when you mention this, is to reinforce them every opportunity you have to, whether it's in one-on-one conversations or if it's in team meetings or stand-up meetings or formal meetings. It's just whatever the principles are, just make sure you're reinforcing and make sure everybody understands what the principles are and what the impact is, the impact that the principles will have on the business.
Yeah, and to the point of making sure they're real. What I've had some teams do, because you're right, Michael, that is almost always, there's always a version of that. Do it right the first time, especially in construction. And I've had some teams say, well, we almost always do it right the first time, yet occasionally mistakes are made. Perhaps somebody's new on the job and has a different way of doing things that throws it off. And so my coaching is always, well, let's benchmark it. Have you measured it? And if so, what's the metric? And if you find that it's done right 95% of the time, then you should make that your guiding principle, that we will do it right at least 95% of the time. And they usually write in there, we always strive to do it right 100% of the time and commit to doing so at least 95% of the time. That way, people can live to the principle always. The matter of making it right. That came up a lot as I was researching this beyond lean manufacturing. I will throw a question out to the group. For those of you who use lean at all, how have you relied on operating principles since the pandemic was a reality? Anybody in that ballpark where you've used lean in your company or your organization? Interesting. Okay. Silence equals we either have zero comment or we're unfamiliar with lean. Okay. Other questions are welcome, folks. What else is on your mind? How can we be helpful with this concept of operating principles? I do have a last one that pops in my mind, because when I've worked with specific teams on this very recently, because I've just learned that it's the best practice myself, and they've said, how does this differentiate from our vision, mission, and values? How are operating principles different? And the answer to that is that they're different because they're specific to the way you conduct your business. Your mission is your reason for being as a company. It's why you exist. Yet your operating principles are what you absolutely live up to day after day, month after month, year after year. Those are your operating principles. So they're an expansion of your mission, if you would. We do have some more comments in chat, so let me look. Okay. You mentioned you will elaborate on lean. You'll get some of the comments that we've made in the post-webinar materials, yet lean is a concept that was developed mid-century. It comes out of Toyota manufacturing, and it's about, take the word literally. It's rather than an acronym, it means doing things, conducting your business as effectively as possible, meaning in a streamlined way at the lowest cost in order to deliver to your operating principles 100% of the time. So that's a great question. It's easy to look it up, lean manufacturing or lean production, and the principles are now applied worldwide and have been for the last 4 or 5 decades. Good question. We have time for another question. You're welcome to vocalize or to put it in chat.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Elvis Garcia. So for these principles, how it's obvious that we gotta get people to think about this on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Timing means everything, but it's something we're short of. When would you suggest, other than the morning, in a morning huddle up, could be the next best time to maybe get people to keep thinking about these principles on a daily basis and just kind of simply be reminded without always having a meeting or pulling everybody together?
Yeah, really good point. And I'm glad you asked the question. It has to do with visibility. And maybe you could consider sending out a quick text or a group message if you use any type of messaging app, or even just a daily email or a weekly email that would take one of the principles and tie it to some initiative for the week, or a project that you have going on, or to recognize somebody, just a real quick reminder. Or it could be as simple as, hey, everybody, happy Monday. Be reminded, here are our 5 operating principles. So you're right, it needs to be top of mind, and that's one way to make them visible. is to just shoot them out in some sort of a broadcast, a chat, or an email, or a message app like Slack or something like that. WhatsApp also works well for that. You could also have a private Twitter channel and use that as well. Was that helpful? And other ideas are welcome to answer his question. It was a really good question. How do you keep them fresh? How do you keep them visible? Okay, we do have 2 minutes left, so if somebody else wants to squeeze in a question, please do. So while you're thinking, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. You do know that if you attend 3 of these Drive-By MBA webinars, you're entered to win a free executive coaching session. So I can tell from looking at the participant list that several of you already have 2 under your belts. Our next webinar is 2 weeks from today, okay? Our Drive-By MBA webinar is 2 weeks from today. Be sure to go ahead and register for that. Also, do look for in your email, as a result of participating, your copy of the presentation and your quick glance tip sheet. We also will provide in the presentation some more examples of good operating principles. Okay, everybody, I want to be mindful of your time. I know it's midday, and I really appreciate you joining. And I neglected to say there's the opportunity to win if you attend all 6 of these Drive-By MBA webinars. You're eligible to win a group coaching session for your team, plus his and her Apple Watches. So those are very compelling incentives, and I look forward to congratulating the winner. So I hope to see you all in 2 weeks. Tell your friends to come. Thanks, everybody. Have a great balance of your day.